is easier for an officer when inmates cooperate or comply given the circumstances. But law enforcement experts say that strategy can go overboard if it allows the kind of casual conduct you're about to see, especially when there's an obvious security question.
I be running from 12 like I'm on a treadmill.
You could easily laugh about this video if the security circumstances at this Fulton jail were not so serious. This is the day room on one of the jail floors. As the inmate performed, an officer observes. Notice the door. It's wide open.
It just seemed too lax and too loose, particularly that door was wide open. The inmate is standing there near the doorway in what we call the red zone, which is strictly prohibited.
More than a dozen participated. As if Pat Labat, the sheriff, does not have enough to worry about. An investigation is pointing to a jail contractor as the individual who used a cell phone to record the scene. Here is a statement from his office. Sheriff Labat believes it is important that everyone who works in the jail follows all guidelines, policies, and procedures to maintain safety and security. Although the contractor who recorded the video was authorized to have a phone in the jail during the course of their official duties, Labat is concerned and disappointed about this flagrant violation and expects the contractor's employer to take appropriate action. Retired Sheriff Lieutenant Charles Rambo is a law enforcement trainer.
There's no recording inside of the jail, period, unless it has been authorized. No reason that type of performance should have been recorded and
it's on Instagram.
Social media to show the internal order of the jail.
That officer?
Alexander Warren on murder and aggravated assault charges. In Illinois, police arrested Caitlin Goebel on charges of concealing a death and tampering with evidence.
We don't know if it's Morgan or if it's something else that they recovered. They're not really sharing that information publicly. And of course, Morgan is still considered a missing person.
19-year-old Morgan Bauer has been missing since 2016, just after she moved to Atlanta and began working at a strip club. For the last 7 years, Casey McClure has helped Morgan's mom. She runs an organization advocating for women in the sex industry. McClure says in the course of their search, they even spoke with the suspects at a club.
She received a tip and said, hey, there was a couple that was hanging out with your daughter and they were in Georgia at this time. And we went to that club and had an interaction with this couple.
McClure said the last time Morgan was seen alive was with Warren and Goebel.
Caitlin was very sweet and polite and well-mannered and seemed concerned about Morgan, and Alex was very frigid.
Morgan's mom wasn't ready to speak on camera, instead writing on Facebook, quote, "What we cannot share is speculation. Please understand, legally and currently, Morgan is still considered a missing person. While we are so grateful that arrests have been made, this is an ongoing investigation."
Hoping that her mother, through this investigation, can get some closure.
And I had a good conversation with the chief of police here in Porterdale. He told me he couldn't make any public comment because the case is now in the hands of the DA's office, but he wanted to thank everybody in this community for their continued support and patience throughout the process. In Porterdale, Rob Urienzo.
Join you today.
Colonel, does this action elevate the risk of an incident that could make relations between the U.S. and China and Russia worse?
Sure, it could, absolutely. Now, anytime you put a lot of ships or any other kind of military forces in the same place and then mess around on someone's borders very closely, you've always run the incident of something happening that may not have even been intended. But I think that the odds based on this incident seem to be increasing every day.
And could that kind of incident spark an actual armed conflict here?
It always has the potential to, and it could be because it's not, even though it's not intended, or it could be because that is the actual result they're seeking. If we were to be more aggressive or to make a mistake in what we're doing in our response, it could cause them to escalate their response to us and blame us for what happened and not what they were doing.
Yeah, when I look at the situation, it's almost like I see a bunch of like dry leaves next to a pile of matches and like some gasoline spilled over. It just, yeah, it doesn't look pretty. How does this recent incident compare to the Chinese spy balloon incident?
I just think it's one more thing that we need to be looking at and be concerned about, because it's not just the spy balloon, which frankly I've always compared the spy balloon to just a public face of something they've been doing to us for decades in China. But if you look at Russian air forces in Syria and what we're doing and Russia's doing in Ukraine and the proximity of our forces and sort of a proxy war going on almost now logistically, all of these things really lead to the potential for something sparking that pile of leaves you mentioned, and it wouldn't be hard to do.
Why do you think these countries have chosen this moment in particular for this kind of harassment?
Well, I think this moment is chosen because of this administration. And it starts off with almost 2 years ago to the day now when we surrendered in Afghanistan. It really showed the world that we are no longer a strong player, that we are going to act out of weakness and cowardice, and we're not going to do the things that need to be done. And they may realize that that window is closing, depending on how the 24 elections go. And so they're going to seek to take advantage of that. And to whatever end, we don't know yet. But if I were them, putting myself in their shoes, I would look at a weak administration and say, now's the time to do something, whatever that may be.
And when you say weak administration, what are you pointing to specifically? You mentioned the Afghanistan withdrawal.
Yeah, the Afghanistan withdrawal was one thing, and the follow-on actions to Afghanistan, both Russia with Ukraine and then China working harder to escalate things and harass Taiwan. You see Russian forces harassing our drones and other forces in Syria. And all of these things, as you look from the major to the minor, what you see are two countries, China and Russia, working in concert as they, some of the pieces on their border include Syria and Iran and what's going on in Israel. And all these pieces really tie together back to this administration not taking any kind of decisive action or sending, comprehensible messages to the world at large saying, hey, we're here to do our part to make sure we help keep the peace. They just
100,000 borrowers. Just weeks before, the Supreme Court struck down a broader cancellation plan pushed by President Biden. The new plan is billed as one-time adjustment in record keeping. It pushes the 800,000 borrowers past a time limit threshold when their debt expires. The suit says it's illegal and asks the judge to stop the Education Department from carrying it out while the case is decided. It was filed by the New Civil Liberties Alliance on behalf of the Mackinac Center for Public Policy and the Cato Institute. Concerns are growing over ransomware attacks on schools. To discuss this growing problem, the White House is saying today it's gathering superintendents and education tech experts. They will look at ways to bolster cybersecurity. Officials say they will also be creating a new council to coordinate between the government and educational institutions. According to the White House, at least 8 states saw ransomware attacks against schools last year. In some cases, sensitive information like medical or behavioral histories were stolen and released online. A woman hired to direct a college's Office of Equity, Social Justice, and Multicultural Education soon encountered fierce opposition from within. NTD's Daniel Monahan has more on the tenure and termination of an educator charged with reducing the so-called wokeness of an institution.
Tabia Lee is a lifelong educator. Even as an elementary school child in the Gifted and Talented program, she spent a lot of time tutoring her peers. Her commitment to education led her to De Anza College. One of her tasks was to reduce the so-called wokeness of the institution, which had experienced conflicts with the staff. But Lee soon realized that her colleagues had a different understanding of social justice than she had.
So, for example, from a classical social justice, you would be really emphasizing things like equality of opportunity. And that's very different from a critical social justice approach. They're emphasizing, like, what is a just society? That's one where we have equal outcomes.
Lee says an academic Senate racial healing resolution had the line, "We acknowledge that America is a systemically racist country founded on white supremacy." Lee suggested adding that America is founded on the principles of fairness and equality, and says there was a backlash.
they said, absolutely not. How could you challenge that we're founded on white supremacy? I said, well, not everyone believes that, and myself included. I'm one of the people who's saying, we're founded on fairness and equality. Whether we've lived up to that or not, we can debate. But to say that we're founded on white supremacy and that racism is everywhere and systemic, that's problematic.
She ran into similar trouble over the Women's Gender and Sexuality Office at the university. There were complaints about white faculty not feeling comfortable going there. She was told that the office was structured for Black, Indigenous people of color, and that's who should be there.
From my perspective, we're a public school. Anyone should be able to come into that Women, Gender, and Sexuality Center. Maybe there's a resource or a book. They want to come somewhere and feel like they're not being judged. They just want to explore things. They may want to change their, major, whatever it may be. I don't think it should be by their race. It should be by, I'm curious about these 3 topics that this office represents. And I was shouted down and told, I was attempting to whitewash the history of the office.
That wasn't the last time she'd hear the term whitewashing. Charged with leading a strategic transformation of the campus, Lee wanted to create some structure and made a Google Doc to track agendas and team meetings.
One of the staff members stopped me and said, stop what you're doing. Right now, what you're doing is you're white speaking and you're white splaining and you're being a white supremacist. You're being transactional. And I'm like, how dare they call me, I'm a Black woman, and I'm being called a white supremacist. That had never happened in my entire teaching career. And not only that, I'd never seen teachers, calling each other names like that.
Lee says her supervisor also wanted her to go to a training on decentering whiteness throughout the system, and soon realized that whether something qualified as decentering whiteness justified doing it or not. After 2 years, Lee was terminated for her non-conforming perspectives and inquiry-based approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion. However, all the positive feedback and support she has received for daring to ask why and attempting to right a ship she felt had lost its way have made it all worth it. According to Lee, that's what it's going to take the nation back. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.